The scent of rosemary roast still filled the dining room when my son-in-law chuckled and called me an old maid, right in front of my granddaughter. Still, I simply turned my fork, letting the tines press into linen as if steadying something far older than rage. As his laughter echoed, the herbs grew louder in my nose, warm, precise, and rooted. While he carried on, I remembered every dinner I'd cooked, every sacrifice he never saw. The same man who mocked my title forgot I once built empires while feeding silence. That's when I decided. If he called me irrelevant at the table, I'd answer from the throne. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The soft hum of city traffic drifted through the open windows of the rooftop restaurant. The evening was cool, but the setting sun still bathed the glass skyscrapers around them in golden light. Irene Castle sipped her wine quietly, the glass resting lightly in her fingers, her eyes scanning the horizon. She was always at ease in moments like these, where the world seemed to slow down and time was nothing but a concept. Around her, the clinking of glasses and low laughter from other diners punctuated the atmosphere, but for Irene, everything seemed still. She had grown used to this feeling of quiet strength. Her daughter, Emily, smiled weakly from across the table, attempting to keep the conversation going, but Irene could tell the tension had already crept in. Graham, her son-in-law, was already 3 glasses into his meal, and the tipsy bravado was starting to show. His loud voice cut through the soft murmur of the restaurant, a little too sharp, a little too unrestrained. You know, not everyone ends up a lonely old maid, huh, Irene? Graham sneered, his eyes darting around the table as if the comment was some clever punchline to a joke no one was laughing at. The words hung in the air, crude and harsh, a sharp contrast to the elegant ambiance of the rooftop. His smirk stretched across his face as he looked at Irene, waiting for a reaction. Emily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. A nervous laugh escaped her lips, but it was empty, forced. Her eyes flicked to her mother, searching for some sign of discomfort, a crack in Irene's composed facade. But Irene didn't flinch. She just blinked once, her gaze steady, a quiet strength in her posture that made the moment feel even heavier. The calm in her eyes made Graham's jabs seem almost childish. Callie, her granddaughter, was sitting next to Irene, eyes wide, watching every exchange with a kind of awareness beyond her 10 years. She froze mid-bite, her small hands gripping the edge of her plate as if she were holding her breath. The slight flicker in Callie's gaze, the quiet way her eyes darted between Graham and Irene, was the only sign that the young girl understood the weight of the words just thrown out into the air. Graham, oblivious to the unease he had caused, leaned back in his chair and waved a dismissive hand. "Seriously, look at all these outdated people with outdated opinions," he continued, as if he were granting them some twisted form of mercy. "They just don't get it, you know? The world's changing, and they're still stuck in the past." The words tumbled from him, a steady stream of self-righteousness. Each syllable aimed at eroding any semblance of respect Irene had earned over the years. His voice had a sharp edge now, more pointed, and for a moment, Irene wondered if anyone had ever bothered to challenge him. Or had they simply let him run unchecked, basking in his own distorted sense of grandeur. But Emily wasn't laughing anymore. She had stopped, her face frozen in a kind of discomfort, unsure of whether to laugh it off or confront her husband. But she knew better. Every time she tried to stand up to him, there was always an excuse. A reason why it wasn't the right time, why she was too tired to argue. But she was too tired to notice, too tired to see the way her mother had taken all the hits over the years, swallowing them silently, never showing the cracks in her own armor. And Irene? Irene didn't respond. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She didn't need to say anything. The silence was enough to fill the room, heavy, suffocating, like a storm waiting to break. Graham's voice grew louder, the arrogance seeping into his words like venom. I mean, seriously, you guys are stuck in some kind of antiquated mindset. No wonder you're still single, Irene. The world doesn't care about your age anymore. It's all about relevance. And you, well, you've got none. The final jab rang out, a clear attempt to puncture Irene's composure. But as the words landed, Irene remained a statue, unmoving. Her grip on the wineglass tightened, but only by the slightest margin. It wasn't until Graham stopped talking that Irene finally spoke, her voice soft, but firm. The world cares about something much more than relevance, Graham. It cares about what you build, not how loudly you boast about it. Emily looked at her mother, a flicker of realization passing across her face, but she couldn't decide what to feel, whether to be angry at Graham or at herself. The quiet tension in the air lingered as the evening continued. No longer a meal, but a battlefield of unspoken words and unfinished conversations. And Callie? Callie kept her eyes on Irene, her small fingers still gripped around her fork, but there was a newfound understanding in her gaze, a quiet resolve. It was only when the waiter returned to clear the dishes that the tension finally started to dissipate, but the damage was done. Graham didn't notice, of course, but Irene knew. She always knew. And as the night went on, Irene's mind began to turn. Each word and gesture already becoming part of a strategy that would make Graham's arrogance feel like nothing more than a fleeting, irrelevant moment in time. But that, too, was a secret she kept, just like everything else. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Irene's study, catching the thin swirl of steam rising from her coffee. The room was curated to precision: mahogany shelves, a minimalist desk, and a single painting above the fireplace, a Chicago skyline, rendered in sharp strokes of silver and gray. Outside, the city pulsed with ambition. Inside, silence reigned, deliberate and weighted. She heard the faint buzz of the private elevator and glanced at the clock. 8:02 a.m., punctual, as always. Noah Reeves didn't believe in arriving fashionably late. He believed in arriving informed. When he stepped inside, the air shifted. Mid-50s, in a tailored charcoal suit, his face was unreadable but for a faint gleam behind the glasses. He carried a leather portfolio so thick it bowed at the clasp. He placed it on the table with care, the sound landing like a verdict. "I trust you had an eventful dinner," Noah said, voice even, measured. Irene didn't look up immediately. She turned a page in the financial newspaper resting beside her coffee. "Eventful isn't quite the word," she murmured. "But it was enlightening." Noah opened the folder. Dozens of documents fanned out: balance sheets, investor memos, screenshots of financial projections, even redacted emails. He slid the top one toward her. "Graham Rourke, CEO of Rourke Dynamics," Noah said. "His company's market valuation is inflated by roughly 60%. Debt ratio, alarming. Projected revenue, fabricated. He's spent more on branding consultants than on product R&D. Irene's eyes flicked to the spreadsheet. "Overhyped," she said softly, tracing a line of figures with her fingertip. "Underfunded, debt leveraged." She smiled, a slow, precise curl of the lips. "Perfect." Noah studied her expression, the faintest trace of amusement ghosting his face. "You always did prefer your prey fattened with confidence." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. "Rot disguised as gold, Noah. And he's polished it well. But you know what happens to polished rot." "It crumbles under pressure," Noah replied. Irene nodded once. "Then let's apply some." He began to outline the structure. The fractured shareholder pool, the absence of a majority owner. Most investors were venture funds too distracted or diluted to care who ran the company, as long as someone promised returns. Graham had charm, buzzwords, and a dangerous faith in his own narrative. Irene listened without interruption, her gaze fixed on the papers but her mind already racing ahead. She wasn't just reading data, she was reading weakness. "What about internal sentiment?" she asked finally. "Every kingdom has cracks before it falls." Noah slid a photograph across the desk. A woman in a sleek navy dress standing at a podium. Confident posture, sharp eyes. "Renee Black," Noah said. "Senior executive. She's been with the company since the early prototype phase. From what I gather, she's capable, loyal to the team, but she's losing patience with Graham's ego. Half the staff respect her more than they do him." Irene studied the photo. "A woman who keeps the wheels turning while the man collects applause." "Precisely," Noah replied. A small silence fell between them, broken only by the rustle of pages as Irene examined line after line of numbers. Then, quietly, she closed the folder. "I don't need control yet," she said. "I just need proximity." Noah arched a brow. "Proximity?" "To the board, to the votes, to the leverage," Irene said, her tone smooth, deliberate. "He won't see me coming. Men like him never do. They're too busy admiring their own reflection to notice the shadow behind it." For the first time that morning, Noah smiled, thin and sharp. He reached for his cup of black coffee, untouched until now, and raised it slightly. "Old maids are quiet," he said. "Predators are quieter." Irene met his gaze over the rim of her glass. "Then let's make some noise when it's time." The faintest sound of traffic drifted in from below. Horns, engines, the rhythmic life of Chicago moving without pause. Irene turned her chair toward the window, her reflection merging with the skyline. "Start with the smaller shareholders," she said, her voice low but steady. "Offer them stability in a storm, quietly. They'll sell without realizing what they've sold." "And Graham?" Noah asked. She looked out over the city, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Let him keep talking. Every arrogant man builds his own gallows with words." Noah gathered his papers, tucking them neatly back into the portfolio. "You're enjoying this," he observed. Irene smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Not yet," she said. "But I will." The elevator doors closed behind him, the soft chime echoing through the empty study. Irene turned back to the folder on her desk, one hand resting on its cover. Through the window, the morning light glinted off the steel towers, the city humming with opportunity and consequence. She opened the folder again, eyes gliding over the company logo embossed at the top of the first page. Her fingers tapped once on the desk. "Soon," she whispered, the single word cutting through the stillness like the first move in a long game. The next family dinner took place 3 weeks later in a private dining room at the Emerson, one of those sleek Chicago spots where the wine menu looked like a legal brief and the waiters glided like diplomats. Irene arrived early. She always did. It gave her time to observe who entered the room and how. Emily came first, frazzled, apologetic, carrying tension like an accessory. "He's just finishing a call," she said, meaning Graham. "He's been so stressed with expansion planning." Irene smiled, polite but thin. "Expansion," she repeated. "How ambitious." The table was set for 4, linen napkins, tall candles, the lake glittering faintly through floor-to-ceiling windows. Emily fidgeted with her water glass. "Mom, about last time." "Don't," Irene interrupted softly. "There's no need." But Emily pressed anyway, voice shrinking with each word. "He didn't mean it, you know. The old maid comment. He just drinks too fast when he's nervous." Irene folded her napkin into her lap, her movements calm, surgical. "He meant every word, dear. That's what makes them valuable." Before Emily could respond, Graham breezed in. Designer suit, unearned grin. the kind of swagger that left no oxygen for anyone else. "Ladies," he announced, spreading his arms like a host instead of a guest. "Sorry I'm late. Empire building isn't 9 to 5. He kissed Emily's cheek perfunctorily and nodded toward Irene with mock courtesy. "Glad you could make it again, Irene. I figured you'd sworn off family dinners after last time." "I never skip meals," Irene replied smoothly, "especially when they promise to be educational." Graham barked a laugh, already scanning the wine list as if he'd said something clever. The waiter hovered, took orders, and disappeared. When the door shut, Graham leaned forward, elbows on the table, his confidence radiating like static. "I've decided it's time," he declared. "Rourke Dynamics is moving into real markets. New York, San Francisco, maybe even overseas. We've outgrown the Midwest stage." Emily's eyes widened. "Already? I thought—" "Momentum doesn't wait for the timid." He cut in. "Investors love me right now. This is when you double down." Irene tilted her head slightly. "And your fundamentals? The debt you carry?" He smirked. "You've been reading headlines again, haven't you? Leave the numbers to people who live in the present. The future belongs to innovators, not historians." The word landed with the same quiet insult as before, wrapped in charm but meant to wound. Irene merely took a sip of her water. "Then may your future be everything you deserve," she said. The rest of dinner unfolded like theater. Graham narrating his own greatness, Emily performing support, Irene listening, cataloging tone, timing, tells. Callie was at a friend's house tonight. Perhaps a mercy. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and resentment. Halfway through the entree, Irene set down her fork and dabbed her lips with the napkin. "Excuse me," she said evenly. "I have an early morning." Emily looked stricken. "Mom, please, just stay for dessert." "I don't eat sugar," Irene replied, rising. "Too corrosive." Graham chuckled. "That explains a lot." She didn't answer. She never did when silence carried more weight. In the hallway, the soft jazz from the main dining floor drifted through the corridor. Irene pressed the elevator button, her reflection crisp in the polished metal doors. As they opened, she stepped inside, only to find another passenger already there. "Mrs. Castle?" The woman was mid-40s, professional, her expression guarded but knowing. "Renee Black. We met briefly at last quarter's shareholder dinner." Irene studied her. "Ah yes, Rourke Dynamics' right hand." Renee's smile was dry, more like the spine. "The right hand's too busy shaking cameras." The elevator hummed downward. Irene said nothing. Silence invited truth. Finally, Renee exhaled. "You don't know me, and I don't expect favors. But if someone were to shake the tree, I'd be ready to help pick up the fruit." The elevator dinged at the lobby. Renee stepped out first, her heels clicking across marble. She didn't look back. Irene remained motionless for a moment, the doors closing again, her reflection splitting in the mirrored steel. By the time she reached the street, the wind had picked up off the lake, cold, sharp, bracing. She drew her coat tighter and slipped into her waiting car. "Home, ma'am?" her driver asked. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Drive to LaSalle." The car glided through the city lights. Irene pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the one labeled Eidolon Holdings, private line. Her thumb hovered for a beat, then pressed call. A man's voice answered instantly. "Ms. Castle?" "Begin acquisitions," she said, quietly. "The small funds first, diversify the shells, no patterns." "Yes, ma'am." Irene ended the call, slipped the phone into her bag, and looked out the window at the skyline. Each tower reflected the other, glittering with borrowed light, fragile, temporary. She smiled faintly, the same way she did when a chess match finally began to tilt in her favor. From her purse came the faint vibration of a message. "Emily. Sorry about him again. He's just excited about the expansion. Irene typed 3 words before the car turned the corner and the signal flickered. He meant it. The car rolled on through the dark streets of Chicago, the glow of the city dancing across Irene's face like firelight. Winter came early that year. Chicago's skyline wore a thin veil of frost, the river glinting like glass beneath gray skies. Irene Castle stood before her window, the city sprawling below her, a living organism of money, ambition, and noise. From this height, she could see it for what it was, a game board, and every piece was already moving exactly as she'd planned. Behind her, Noah Reeves worked silently at a side desk, his laptop screen reflected in his glasses, columns of figures, coded accounts, transaction IDs spread across multiple jurisdictions. 3 fronts, Irene said without turning, separate LLCs. Keep the identities clean. I want distance between them, even on paper. Already in progress, Noah replied. Eidolon Ventures, Harbor Light Capital, and Vireo Holdings. Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. She finished for him. Of course. A thin smile curved her lips. The state of ghosts. He nodded once. Each entity will appear to be an independent investor. No cross-linking, no common signatories. Even the accountants won't know who they're working for. Good, Irene said. No one ever suspects the quiet money. The printer hummed. She reached for the first of the documents. A purchase order. 3% stake through a mid-tier venture fund desperate for liquidity. The ink was still warm. Irene initialed each page with a steady hand. Noah looked up. Once we close this tranche, you'll control just under 15% of Work Dynamics through intermediaries, still flying below disclosure thresholds. That's the point, Irene replied. The art of power is making sure no one sees it coming until it's already too late. She moved to the credenza, pouring herself a small glass of bourbon. Her reflection in the window was precise, hair pinned, expression unreadable. Noah checked his phone. He's on CNBC this morning, he said, talking about their next funding round. Irene turned, arching a brow. Play it. The audio crackled to life, a confident, performative voice filling the room. Graham's voice. And we're in talks with a major investor, he was saying, his tone brimming with the false polish of a man who believed his own myth. A celebrity name, actually. Can't give details yet, but it'll make headlines next quarter. Noah muted it. He's drumming up buzz to inflate valuation before dilution hits. Irene swirled her drink, ice clinking softly. Let him celebrate, she murmured. Arrogance makes for excellent cover. Outside, snow began to drift down over the streets, thin at first, then thicker. It muffled the noise of the city, the honking, the shouting, the chaos. For Irene, it was the perfect soundtrack to precision. Days passed. Transactions moved through layers of proxies. Bankers called, lawyers filed, consultants signed without reading. The machine of finance spun, and Irene controlled it with the invisible touch of a puppeteer who never needed strings. By late January, Noah walked into her office with a sealed folder and a look that betrayed quiet triumph. Confirmation came through, he said. Across the 3 entities, combined stake now totals 34%. You are officially the largest silent stakeholder in Work Dynamics. Irene didn't react at first. She merely lifted her eyes from the papers on her desk and met his. 34, she repeated softly. A fine number. Not quite control, but enough to whisper when I choose, and be heard. Noah leaned forward. You realize he's tweeting about the company's growth while you hold a third of it. Of course he is, Irene said. The louder he gets, the less anyone listens carefully. Noise is a gift, Noah. It hides the footsteps. He smiled faintly. I've always admired your patience. She glanced down at her watch. Patience isn't a virtue, it's a strategy. Across the city, in a sleek office with panoramic views, Graham Rourke was hosting a live stream. Bright lights, white teeth, talking about expansion and innovation. His followers flooded the feed with praise. He didn't notice the slight dip in share availability or the subtle reallocation of board voting power. He didn't notice that one of his senior executives, Renee Black, had begun copying Irene on internal updates. That evening, as the sky turned dark, Irene received a message. Renee Black, encrypted file attached. She clicked it open. Inside was a spreadsheet marked Employee Sentiment Survey, confidential. The final comment line caught her eye. He talks about future value, but we're the ones paying for his ego. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. A text, short and sharp. Renee. He has no idea he's on borrowed time. Irene's reply came instantly. Irene. Good. Let him keep spending it. She set her phone down, eyes drifting toward the window. Snow had stopped. The city lights gleamed cold and unyielding, reflections scattered like gold dust over the dark river. Irene lifted her bourbon again, the amber liquid catching the light. Borrowed time. She repeated softly, almost to herself. It always runs out faster than they think. She took one slow sip, savoring the silence that followed. The silence before the fall. The morning sky over Chicago was gunmetal gray, streaked with thin clouds that promised snow but never delivered. It was the kind of morning Irene Castle loved best, quiet, expectant, just before the first domino fell. From the 31st floor of the North Harbor building, the boardroom of Rourke Dynamics gleamed with surgical precision. Glass walls, brushed steel fixtures, a panoramic view of the river cutting through the frozen city. The company's logo, an abstract flame, hung behind the head chair, as if mocking what was about to happen. Noah Reeves stood near the window, reviewing a final spreadsheet on his tablet. His expression was calm, but his eyes flicked to the clock more than once. She's on her way, he said without looking up. Everything in order? A voice asked from behind him. Renee Black, immaculate in navy, her tone low and steady. Noah nodded. Every signature, every share certificate, every proxy. 34% in her hands and a few more votes persuaded by reason. Renee smiled faintly. Reason. That's a polite word for fear. Before Noah could answer, the elevator doors opened. Graham Rourke strode in, trailed by two assistants and the faint echo of camera shutters. He was wearing the grin of a man who'd already won. Morning, everyone, he boomed, setting his coffee down like a man claiming territory. Reporters downstairs almost tackled me. Guess they heard we're about to announce something big. His charm filled the room like a cheap cologne, loud, overconfident, impossible to ignore. He gave Renee a once-over that lingered too long. Ms. Black, always a pleasure. You look far too serious. It's just business, not a funeral. Not yet, Renee murmured. Graham didn't hear her. He was too busy shaking hands, too busy loving the sound of his own voice. Then the elevator chimed again. Every conversation stopped. Heads turned. Irene Castle stepped out. She was dressed in black and silver, sharp lines, understated elegance, the kind of outfit that made people sit up a little straighter without knowing why. Her heels clicked against the marble floor in slow, measured rhythm. She didn't look at Graham. She didn't have to. The air changed just by her entering it. Irene, Graham said, recovering quickly. Didn't expect to see you here, unless you're our mystery investor. She smiled. Small, restrained. I've been called worse. A ripple of laughter moved across the table, nervous and unsure. Renee moved aside to make space. Irene took the seat opposite Graham, setting down a slim leather folder. Noah followed, placing identical packets in front of each board member. The sound of paper sliding across the table was soft. final. Graham frowned. What's this? An emergency session, Noah said evenly. Called under Clause 7.4. Change of leadership. Graham blinked. Change of... What are you talking about? Who authorized this? I did, Irene said, voice calm, almost gentle. He laughed, genuinely amused. You? You're not even on the board. Renee's eyes met his, steady. She is now. As of last week, her holdings entitle her to 3 seats. She consolidated them this morning. The words landed like a crack of thunder. Graham's smirk faltered. You can't be serious. But the board members, 5 men, 2 women, were already flipping open their packets. Inside were printed resolutions, voting instructions, and a single line at the top, motion to remove Graham Rourke as Chief Executive Officer of Rourke Dynamics, effective immediately. Color drained from his face. This is insane. You think you can just walk in and... I'm not walking in, Irene interrupted, her tone cutting clean through his protest. I'm reclaiming what's been misused. There's a difference. He looked around the room for support, but eyes dropped, papers rustled. His allies weren't allies anymore, just investors watching a number fall on a screen. You're making a mistake, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. You remove me, you tank the company. I am the company. Renee leaned forward. You are the noise. We'll manage the signal. Noah distributed pens. Please mark your votes. The scratching of ink filled the silence. Graham stood pacing, muttering under his breath. His confidence cracked in real time, the transformation almost pitiful. When Noah collected the packets, Irene didn't look at the ballots. She didn't have to. She already knew the math. Noah read the results. 6 in favor, 1 opposed. Graham's jaw tightened. You can't do this to me. Irene met his glare, calm as the winter river outside. I'm not doing anything to you, Mr. Rourke. I'm simply correcting the record. He slammed his hands on the table. I built this. And I bought it, she said quietly. Effective immediately. You are removed as CEO. For a moment, there was only the hum of the ventilation system, the faint shuffle of papers. Then Graham's voice, hoarse and trembling. You think this is over? Irene stood. No. This is where it starts to get interesting. She gathered her folder, turned, and walked toward the glass doors. Reporters were still waiting in the lobby downstairs, flashes going off through the glass. Noah followed a few steps behind. Press will want a statement, he said softly. Let them speculate, Irene replied. Mystery always trades well. The elevator opened. Before she stepped inside, she caught her reflection in the mirrored doors. Poised, composed, inevitable. Behind her, the boardroom door opened again. Renee leaned out, phone in hand. The media already got wind of it, she said. Headline reads, Rourke Dynamics under new leadership. Irene smiled faintly. Perfect timing. As the elevator doors closed, Graham's furious shouting echoed faintly down the hall. Anger, disbelief, the sound of power slipping away. Irene pressed the button for the lobby, her expression serene. The snow had finally arrived. Thick, deliberate flakes fell past Irene Castle's window, softening the edges of Chicago's skyline. It was evening now. The city lights blurring through the snowfall like half-buried stars. Inside her apartment, everything was still. Fireplace low, a single lamp glowing near the piano, the bourbon untouched beside it. The vote was over. The news had broken. The world, as far as Irene was concerned, had already begun to rearrange itself. Her phone rang. The name on the screen made her close her eyes for a beat before answering. Emily. Her daughter's voice came through ragged, broken. Why would you do this to him, Mom? What the hell were you thinking? Irene stayed silent for a moment. There was pain on the line. Real. Unfiltered. She could hear the way Emily's breath hitched, could picture her pacing their kitchen, tears smudging her mascara. "I didn't do it to him," Irene said at last, her tone calm but weighted. "I did it for everyone else." Emily's voice rose, cracking. "You blindsided your own daughter. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The media's already calling it a coup. My husband—" "Your husband," Irene interrupted, "mocked his investors, drained his staff, and made his family a punchline. He blindsided himself, Emily. I just turned on the lights." There was a long silence, broken only by the faint hum of city traffic below. "You've always done this," Emily whispered finally. "Controlled everything, pulled strings because you think you know what's best. But this was my life, Mom. My marriage. You tore it apart in front of everyone." Irene's voice softened, not defensive, simply sad. "No, dear. He blinded you. I removed the veil." The words lingered, sharp and clear. On the other end, Emily's sob turned into something quieter, shakier. "He's saying you've ruined him, that the board betrayed him because of you." "The board didn't betray him," Irene replied. "They saw through him. He should be grateful it ended in a vote, not a scandal." Emily gave a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half despair. "You sound proud." "I sound relieved," Irene corrected. "For the first time in years, I don't have to watch you apologize for a man who doesn't deserve your loyalty." The silence that followed was heavier this time, stretching between mother and daughter like a fault line that had finally split open. "I have to go," Emily whispered. He's not doing well." "I'm sure he isn't," Irene said quietly. "Consequences never suit the unprepared." Emily hung up without another word. The call ended, and the room seemed to grow larger, emptier. Irene set the phone down, her hand steady even as something inside her twisted. She stared at the snow falling outside, quiet, relentless, erasing the outlines of everything beneath it. A soft knock interrupted the silence. She turned. Callie stood in the doorway, her small figure framed by the warm light of the hallway. The child's hair was tousled from sleep, her oversized sweater slipping off one shoulder. "Grandma," Irene's voice gentled. "You should be in bed, darling." Callie hesitated, then crossed the room, bare feet padding across the carpet. She didn't say anything. She just climbed into her grandmother's lap and wrapped her arms around her neck, pressing her cheek against Irene's shoulder. For the first time that night, Irene's breath caught. Callie didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Children always knew who the real villains were, even when adults refused to see them. "I'm okay," Irene murmured, more to herself than to Callie. Callie squeezed tighter and the fireplace popped, a single ember sparking and dying. After a long moment, Irene whispered, "It's over now." But she knew it wasn't. Not really. Across the city, in a corner office that used to be Graham Rourke's, a quiet shuffle of papers marked the start of something new. Renee Black stood at the head of the boardroom table addressing the leadership team. "Effective immediately," she announced. "I'll be serving as interim CEO until further notice." The staff broke into cautious applause. Relief rippled through the room. Renee met Noah Reeves's eyes at the back of the room. He nodded once, confirmation that everything had gone exactly as Irene planned. Outside, the snow kept falling. Back in Irene's apartment, she brushed a strand of hair from Callie's face and looked toward the dark window, her reflection faint and fractured in the glass. Her phone buzzed again on the side table. This time, she didn't recognize the number. The message preview glowed on the screen. "Graham Rourke. You took my company. Now I'm taking it back." Irene's gaze didn't waver. She reached for the phone, read the message twice, then placed it face down beside the untouched bourbon. Let him try, she whispered. Outside, the snow thickened and Chicago disappeared under a curtain of white. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and cold air. Sterile, impersonal. The kind of place where power was stripped of polish and left naked under fluorescent lights. Irene Castle stepped through the security line in a camel-colored coat, gloves tucked neatly into one hand, her expression composed. She had chosen her outfit carefully. Nothing extravagant, nothing defensive. Elegance without threat. The armor of a woman who didn't need to announce her power because it was already self-evident. Graham Rourke, by contrast, was all restless energy and anger wrapped in an expensive suit. He stood near the conference room door, pacing, jaw tight. The swagger was gone. In its place was something brittle, panic dressed as indignation. When he saw Irene, his mouth curled into a sneer. "You shouldn't be here," he spat. "You've done enough damage." Irene removed her gloves one finger at a time. "Apparently not. You're still talking." He laughed, short and sharp. "I'm going to win this, you know. Fraud, coercion, manipulation. You name it. You tricked everyone, and the court's going to see that." "Then I look forward to hearing your evidence," she said evenly. "Assuming it exists." Inside the mediation chamber, the tension was almost physical. A long oak table divided the room, each side flanked by attorneys and assistants, screens glowing with digital exhibits. At the far end sat the mediator, a retired judge with gray hair, sharp eyes, and the permanent weariness of someone who'd seen too many self-inflicted tragedies. "Let's keep this civil," he began, his tone making clear he didn't expect that to happen. Graham's attorney wasted no time. "My client asserts that Ms. Castle engaged in a deliberate campaign of deception to obtain control of Rourke Dynamics, misrepresenting her ownership through shell corporations, misleading board members, and leveraging undue influence." Irene's lawyer raised a hand. "All of which, Your Honor, can be disproven within the first 10 minutes of review." The judge gestured. "Proceed." Irene didn't delegate. She rose herself. Every movement deliberate. She slid a slim folder across the table toward the judge, the paper whispering like the start of a storm. "These are the original filings for Eidolon Ventures, Harborlight Capital, and Vireo Holdings," she said. "Registered, disclosed, audited. Here are the transaction receipts, dated, notarized, and verified through 3 independent accounting firms. You'll also find board consent forms for each purchase." Graham shifted in his chair. She hid behind legal tricks. Irene didn't look at him. "Transparency is not a trick, Mr. Rourke. It's just inconvenient when you're used to deception." Her attorney placed another folder before the judge. Emails, disclosures, compliance documents, time-stamped and sealed. Every page a nail in the coffin Graham had built himself. The judge skimmed a few pages, his brow lifting slightly. "These appear legitimate. Counsel?" Graham's lawyer hesitated. "We request additional time to review the—" "Denied," the judge said flatly. "This is straightforward." He turned to Graham. "You filed this motion claiming fraud. Based on what I've seen, there is none. Everything was executed properly under state and federal law." Graham leaned forward, his voice cracking. "She stole my company." The judge's eyes were tired but unyielding. "She bought it, Mr. Rourke. You signed the disclosures yourself." For a moment, the room went utterly still. Emily sat in the back row, silent, pale. She looked between her husband and her mother as if trying to reconcile 2 versions of truth, one she'd been told and one that was now undeniable. Graham turned toward her, desperate. "Em, you know this isn't right. You know she—" Emily couldn't meet his eyes. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap they trembled. Irene glanced at her daughter, and for the briefest moment something softened in her expression. Then she faced the judge again. "Your ruling, Your Honor?" The judge closed the folder and set it aside. Motion denied. Case dismissed. Ms. Castle acted within her rights as a majority stakeholder. Mr. Rourke, any further litigation of this matter will be considered frivolous. The gavel struck once, sharp, final. Graham slumped back in his chair, the color draining from his face. You think this is justice? He hissed. You've destroyed me. Irene stood, adjusting her coat. You destroyed yourself, Mr. Rourke. I simply cleaned up the debris. He pushed back his chair, voice rising. You're unfit. You're vindictive. You're old? She finished for him, eyes glinting. Yes. You called me that once, and yet my mind outlived your tantrum. Renee, waiting in the hallway, caught Irene's gaze as she exited the chamber. It's done? She asked quietly. Done, Irene said. For him, at least. Outside, the snow had melted to slush. The air was crisp, the streets humming with late-morning traffic. Irene slipped on her gloves, the faintest smile crossing her face as she looked up at the courthouse steps, where justice wasn't loud, but it was permanent. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Noah Reeves. Noah, congratulations. The board just voted to confirm Renee as permanent CEO. The headlines are calling it a new era. Irene typed back only 2 words. So it begins. But as she started toward her waiting car, a black sedan pulled up across the street. Inside, barely visible through tinted glass, a familiar silhouette sat watching her. Motionless. Graham. Their eyes met for one heartbeat before the car eased into traffic and disappeared. The morning after the court ruling, Chicago looked sharp enough to cut glass. The sky was pale steel, and the wind off the river had the bite of unfinished business. Graham Rourke pulled his coat tighter as he crossed the plaza toward the North Harbor building, the glass and concrete monument that once bore his name on the top floor's frosted door. Reporters had thinned out overnight, but a few lingered across the street, cameras raised, voices muffled by scarves. He ignored them. Today, he told himself, was about reclamation. The company might have pushed him out on paper, but optics could be rewritten. Inside the lobby, the marble floor gleamed as always. The same security desk, the same abstract art on the walls. Familiar. His domain. Or it used to be. He flashed his old access badge at the gate. The turnstile didn't budge. Badge is inactive, sir, the guard said, not unkindly. Graham's jaw tightened. I'm the CEO. The guard tapped his tablet. According to this, you're not. For a moment, the words didn't register. The humiliation arrived second, colder and sharper. Get Renee Black down here, he snapped. Now! The guard made a call. Minutes later, Renee emerged from the elevator. Poised as ever. Dark hair pulled back, tablet under one arm, her expression neutral but unyielding. Renee, he said, forcing a smile. Finally, let's put this nonsense to rest. She stopped a few feet short of him, hands folded loosely. You shouldn't be here, Graham. This is my building. Correction, she said, her tone measured. It's the company's building, and the company has moved on. His voice rose. Moved on? You mean she took everything from me, and you helped her do it? Renee's eyes didn't waver. She gave us something you never did. A future. This space belongs to that now. The security guard cleared his throat gently. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Graham's laugh was hollow. You're throwing me out of my own office? You've got to be kidding. But Renee simply turned toward the elevator. Goodbye, Graham. He lunged a step forward. Don't you walk away from me, Renee. She didn't. She just pressed the elevator button and disappeared behind the closing doors. The humiliation burned through his chest like acid. Reporters outside caught the scene through the glass. He could already imagine the headlines. Disgraced founder barred from own company. He left before they could get the shot he knew they wanted. his face breaking. That evening, Emily found him sitting on the edge of their bed, tie loosened, eyes dark. The house felt cavernous, full of expensive silence. "Graham," she said softly, "you shouldn't have gone there." He looked up, his anger cracking into something desperate. "You think I'm just going to let her win? She humiliated me. She took everything. You could talk to her. Make her see reason." Emily's voice was calm, but the exhaustion behind it was palpable. "Reason?" she repeated. "You mocked her in public, Graham. You called her irrelevant." She answered in policy. "That wasn't policy. That was revenge." "Maybe it was both," Emily said quietly. He stared at her, searching for the woman who used to defend him without hesitation. But she was gone, replaced by someone who had finally seen the wreckage. "You used to be on my side," he said. Emily met his gaze. "I was on your side long after you stopped deserving it." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The next morning, Irene arrived at Rourke Dynamics, not as a visitor, but as the owner who had no need for introductions. The atmosphere was different now. Lighter, quieter, almost expectant. Renee met her in the executive wing, a stack of files in hand. "We've restored morale, at least temporarily." The staff's cautious, but hopeful. Irene smiled faintly. "Hope is a currency. Let's spend it wisely." She walked the length of the corridor, pausing at the glass doors that once bore Graham's name. It was gone now, replaced by a new plaque. Renee Black, Chief Executive Officer. Inside, sunlight poured over the room. Irene stepped to the window, gazing out at the skyline, her reflection layered over the city she'd conquered. "It's time we updated the mission statement," she said. Renee arched a brow. "To what?" Irene turned, her expression unreadable. "No room for arrogance." Renee's smile was small, but genuine. That might be the first company value that actually means something. Later that day, the updated mission statement went live across every internal monitor, every employee email footer. Staff who had once whispered through clenched teeth now shared knowing looks, small smiles. The office buzzed, not with fear, but with energy. Applause broke out in one corner of the floor after an all-hands announcement. Bonuses reinstated, layoffs frozen, transparency restored. The weight that Graham's ego had pressed onto the company seemed to lift all at once. Irene stood by the window of the boardroom, listening. It wasn't the hollow cheer of compliance. It was gratitude, quiet and real. Noah Reeves joined her. "You've rebuilt something good here," he said. She looked down at the city below. Not rebuilt. Corrected. Her phone vibrated in her hand. A private number. She stepped aside and answered. A clipped male voice came through. "Mrs. Castle, we thought you should know. Graham's been seen meeting with a venture group out of Boston. He's telling them he's planning a comeback." Irene's gaze sharpened. "Let him try," she said softly. Outside, the building lights reflected on the river, golden and sure. Inside, Irene smiled to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. He never learned. You can't fight what you never understood. For the first time in years, Irene Castle's dining room smelled like home. Not power or polish or performance, just home. The faint aroma of roasted garlic and thyme drifted through the air, winding its way through the house, softening every edge of the winter evening outside. The table was set for 3, white linen, crystal glasses, a single candle at the center, not for show, but for warmth. Irene stood at the stove in a dark blue apron, sleeves rolled up, her movements fluid and unhurried. She hadn't cooked a full meal herself in over a decade, but tonight wasn't about convenience. It was about reclaiming something, quietly, on her own terms. A knock echoed through the hall. She untied her apron and walked to the door, wiping her hands on the cloth. Emily stood there, shoulders drawn tight beneath her coat, eyes uncertain but searching. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Come in," Irene replied. Emily hesitated before stepping over the threshold, her gaze sweeping across the dining room. The warmth from the kitchen hit her first, then the familiar smell of her mother's old Sunday roast. It was disarming, grounding. "You cooked?" Emily said, almost a whisper. "I did." "Not even a caterer?" "Just me." Irene smiled faintly. "I wanted tonight to be real." Emily removed her coat, hanging it neatly on the stand by the door. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. Too many sleepless nights. Too much silence. "It smells incredible." "It's been a long time since we ate without an audience," Irene said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. "Let's start there." They sat. For a while, conversation tiptoed around the obvious: the weather, Callie's school, the city's first thaw after weeks of snow. It was small talk dressed in grief, but it was something. Then, soft footsteps approached. "Grandma." Callie appeared in the doorway, holding a folded napkin in both hands. She wore a little sweater the color of coral, her hair pulled into a messy bun. Irene's entire face softened. "There you are, sweetheart. Hungry?" Callie nodded and slipped into the chair beside her grandmother. "I made something for you." She unfolded the napkin carefully and slid it across the table. Scrawled in looping marker was a crooked crown and, beneath it, one word: Queen. For the first time that evening, Irene's composure cracked. A single breath caught in her throat, light but sharp. She touched the doodle as though it were porcelain. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's the most honest title anyone's ever given me." Emily smiled faintly, a trace of the girl she used to be glimmering for a heartbeat. "She's been calling you that for weeks." Before Irene could reply, the front door opened. The sound of cold air, a heavy coat shrugging off, and then his voice. "Smells good in here." "Graham." Emily went rigid. Callie's fork froze midair. Irene turned slowly toward the hall. He stood there in the doorway, wearing a dark wool coat and an expression that was halfway between contrition and defiance. "Don't worry," he said quickly, hands raised in mock surrender. "I'm not here to fight. I just wanted dinner. One normal night." "You weren't invited," Irene said evenly. "I know." He looked around the table, eyes lingering on the plates, the roast, the flicker of the candlelight. "But this used to be my family too." Emily looked from him to her mother, torn. "Mom, it's all right," Irene said, her tone unreadable. "He's already here. Let him sit." Graham exhaled, almost relieved, and slipped into the chair across from her. For a few moments, the only sound was the soft clink of silverware. The silence between them was thick, unspoken years condensed into the air. He tried to meet her gaze. "You really cooked all this?" "I did," Irene said. "It's not as difficult as rebuilding a company from the ground up. But it requires patience, something you never seem to have." He flinched but said nothing. Callie shifted in her seat, eyes darting between adults. Emily reached for her hand beneath the table. After several tense minutes, Graham cleared his throat. "Look, I know I made mistakes, but everything that happened was earned," Irene finished. "By your choices, not mine." "I lost everything, Irene." "You lost control," she corrected. "Everything else is still yours to rebuild. Assuming you've learned how to build without stepping on others to see over them." His jaw flexed. "You're enjoying this?" "No," Irene said. "I'm reclaiming it." She picked up her glass, met his eyes directly, and added, "And for the record, I don't serve seconds to guests who mocked the chef." The words hung between them like the blade of a guillotine, polite, poised, but absolute. Graham pushed back his chair slightly, the scrape of wood on tile harsh in the quiet room. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he stood. "You know," he said softly, "power looks good on you, Irene. Almost makes me wish I'd seen it sooner." "You did," she said. "You just thought it was yours." He nodded once, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, and left without another word. When the door shut behind him, Callie whispered, "He's not coming back, is he?" Irene smoothed the girl's hair gently. "Not here, no." Emily looked down, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "He's different now." "No," Irene said quietly. "He's the same. You're just finally seeing clearly." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of old wounds finally settling. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, but inside, the warmth held steady. Irene raised her glass, her voice calm, certain. "To truth," she said. Emily and Callie followed suit. "To truth." The clink of crystal was soft, but unbreakable. The morning after the dinner, sunlight fell through Irene's kitchen window in fractured gold. The dishes from the night before were still drying on the rack. The candle burned down to a stub. It was the kind of quiet that only came after confrontation, the uneasy calm of clarity. Irene stood at the counter, stirring her coffee, when she heard footsteps behind her. Emily. She looked pale, exhausted, but something in her face had changed. The defensiveness that had once shielded her was gone. In its place was raw honesty. "I didn't sleep," Emily said, voice low. "Neither did I," Irene replied. "Coffee?" Emily nodded, and Irene poured a second cup, sliding it across the counter. They stood on opposite sides, steam rising between them. "I knew he was wrong for years," Emily said finally, the words trembling as they left her mouth. "I just kept pretending not to. I thought if I defended him hard enough, it would make him decent again." Irene didn't speak right away. She just waited. Emily had always needed silence more than advice. "He made me feel small," Emily went on, "like I owed him for everything. For the house, the parties, the illusion of success. I kept telling myself he was just stressed or misunderstood. But he wasn't. He was cruel." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "You were right, Mom. Every time you said he'd show his true self, I brushed it off. I didn't want to admit I'd married someone who saw people as props." Irene's gaze softened. "Then, you know what you must do next." Emily swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. "I already called my lawyer this morning. We're starting the process of dividing assets. The house, the accounts, everything." Irene's nod was small, but proud. "Good." Emily gave a shaky laugh. "He's not taking it well. He came by the condo an hour ago. Flowers, apologies, promises to change." "And you?" Irene asked. "I told him I don't believe in recycled vows," she said. "He used up his credibility years ago." Irene smiled faintly into her coffee. "That's my daughter." Emily exhaled, a long, cleansing breath, and looked around the kitchen, as if seeing it for the first time. The air here felt different, solid, safe. "I used to think strength looked like forgiveness," she said. "But it doesn't. It looks like this." From the hallway, a smaller voice interrupted. "Mom?" Callie stood there, holding a phone in her hand. The screen lit up with a familiar name. "Dad." "He keeps texting me," she said softly. "I don't know what to say." Emily crouched down, meeting her daughter's eyes. "You don't have to say anything, baby." Callie bit her lip. "But what if he gets mad?" "He already is," Irene said gently. "That's not your burden." For a moment, Callie looked between them, mother and grandmother, and something settled in her face. A choice, clean and final. She tapped the screen once, held it a second longer, then swiped right. Delete contact. The sound was soft but absolute. Emily closed her eyes. Good girl. Irene's heart ached and swelled all at once. She placed a hand on Callie's shoulder, steady and sure. You're not losing a father tonight, she said. You're gaining your voice. Outside, the city's hum carried faintly through the windows, the ordinary world continuing as if the moment weren't monumental. But inside, 3 generations of silence had just broken. Emily straightened, wiping her eyes. He underestimated every woman at this table, she said quietly. Irene raised her cup in a silent toast. Men like him always do. The kettle clicked behind them. Callie giggled softly, breaking the heaviness, and began setting out plates for breakfast. 3. Just like the night before. Emily looked at her mother again, her voice steady now. You know, when you took over the company, I was angry. But now I understand. You weren't trying to humiliate him. You were showing me what power looks like when it's earned. Irene smiled, not smugly, but with quiet satisfaction. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you demonstrate. They ate together in the calm, the warmth between them fragile but real. The light through the window caught Irene's silver hair, turning it gold for a moment. When the meal was done, Emily stood, kissed her mother's cheek, and said, "Thank you for fighting for me when I couldn't." "Always," Irene replied. The door shut behind them, leaving Irene alone with the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. She rinsed her cup, set it in the sink, and reached for her phone. A new message blinked at the top of the screen. Noah Reeves. He's moving fast. Graham just registered a new company name, Rourke Capital Revival. Irene stared at the words, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered, "So the boy still wants his toys." She slipped the phone into her pocket, eyes turning toward the window, where the skyline cut sharp against the morning sun. Winter began to loosen its grip on Chicago, but Graham Rourke's luck froze harder by the week. The city that once lit up for him now ignored his shadow entirely. His new startup, Rourke Capital Revival, existed only on paper and in his sleepless ambitions. Every door that once opened for him had turned to glass, transparent, visible, but unbreakable. He sat in his loft apartment overlooking the river, the morning sun glinting off unopened investor packets. His laptop screen glowed with unread emails, polite rejections dressed in corporate diplomacy. Appreciate the opportunity. Not aligned with our current portfolio strategy. Wishing you success elsewhere. Elsewhere was nowhere. He picked up his phone, scrolling through contacts, names he used to summon with a single text. Venture partners, financiers, friends who had once laughed too loudly at his jokes, all gone quiet. One message thread stood out. Noah Reeves. He typed fast, reckless. "You've been whispering about me, haven't you? Calling in favors, freezing me out." A few minutes later, the reply arrived. Short, controlled. "No, Graham, we didn't block you. We just didn't vouch." The words landed harder than any insult could have. Graham threw his phone down, pacing the length of the room. The silence mocked him. He opened Twitter instead. His old arena. He began typing. Funny how the people who preach integrity are the first to stab you when you stop playing their game. He hit send. Then another. Loyalty isn't dead. It just left the room when the cameras turned off. For a few minutes he refreshed obsessively, waiting for the likes, the sympathy, the outrage. Nothing came. The screen was a graveyard of indifference. Across town, Irene Castle watched the same feed from her office at the newly rebranded Castle Equity Group. Her expression didn't change. She sipped her coffee, eyes steady on the monitor. Noah stood near the window, scrolling through his own phone. "He's unraveling," he said. "2 investors pulled out of his new fund this morning. They don't want to be associated with instability. Instability? Irene asked mildly. That's the polite word for ego. Noah smiled faintly. He doesn't realize that the venture world doesn't care about comebacks. It cares about credibility. And his is gone. Irene turned her chair toward him. What's the latest sentiment? He's being frozen out organically, Noah replied. We didn't need to interfere. No one trusts him enough to risk $1. Reputation does the heavy lifting. Irene nodded slowly, thoughtful. That's the thing about power, Noah. It can't be borrowed. It has to be earned, and kept in silence until it's too late to steal. Her phone buzzed. A reminder notification. She smiled faintly. Time to change the narrative, she said. Let's head to the forum. The ballroom of the Hyatt on Wabash Avenue shimmered with understated wealth, brushed gold fixtures, white orchids, and rows of women in sharp suits and quiet confidence. The annual Women's Investment Forum had never felt this alive. When Irene took the stage, the applause was immediate but reverent. She didn't wave. She simply stood, the weight of composure drawing the room's focus to her like gravity itself. Good afternoon, she began, her voice smooth as glass. I'm not here to talk about money. I'm here to talk about value, the kind that doesn't depreciate. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. When I started in this field, I was told that my best years were behind me by the time I turned 50. That youth meant relevance, and age meant obsolescence. But experience, she said, pausing, is the only currency that doesn't deflate. The audience leaned forward, phones recording. Age is the price of wisdom, she continued. Mock it and pay in full. The room broke into applause, long, sustained, the kind that carried both admiration and catharsis. Cameras flashed, hashtags erupted across social media within minutes. By the time she stepped off the stage, the quote had already gone viral. Screens in the lobby buzzed with her words, overlaid on photographs of her poised silhouette. Noah met her by the exit, grinning. You just turned an insult into a brand. I didn't have to, Irene said. It always was one. Outside, the evening wind swept through Michigan Avenue, scattering flyers from the event down the pavement. Irene pulled her coat tighter, the city glittering in the distance like a stage she now commanded effortlessly. That night, alone in his loft, Graham scrolled through his phone again. Her quote filled every feed, trending, quoted, admired. He hurled the device across the room, shattering it against the wall. The screen cracked, the last thing visible before it went black. Age is the price of wisdom. Mock it, and pay in full. His reflection glared back at him from the dark window. We'll see who pays, he muttered. Then he picked up a pen and scrawled 3 words on a yellow notepad. Castle Equity Summit. His hand tightened around the page. If she wants a stage, he whispered, I'll burn the spotlight. The courthouse on Dearborn felt colder this time, not from the weather, but from the anticipation. The air inside carried that metallic hush unique to places where consequences lived. Reporters were gathered outside again, but no one called Irene Castle's name this morning. They knew better now. She walked through the marble lobby with her gloves folded neatly in one hand, her daughter beside her. Emily's face was pale, her posture taut with disbelief. Mom, she whispered as they neared the courtroom doors, are you sure we have to do this? Can't this be settled privately? Irene's voice was calm. Some endings deserve witnesses. Inside, Graham was already seated at the petitioner's table, flanked by lawyers who looked more nervous than confident. His once perfect posture sagged, the cuff of his jacket fraying where his hands gripped the table too tightly. When Emily entered, he turned, eyes tired, smile brittle. You don't have to go through with this, he said quietly. We can fix it. Everything we built. Emily cut him off. her voice sharper than she meant it to be. "We didn't build anything, Graham. You just let me hold the blueprints." His jaw clenched, the flash of anger returning for a moment before he forced it down. The bailiff called for order. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s, eyes clear, efficient. "We're here to finalize the division of marital assets between Emily Castle Rourke and Graham Rourke. Counsel, proceed." Graham's attorney rose first, adopting the tone of a man selling sincerity. "Your Honor, my client believes that Ms. Rourke's mother, Mrs. Irene Castle, exerted undue influence over the financial arrangements in this marriage. We're requesting a review of property titles, joint holdings, and the prenuptial agreement." Irene said nothing, only opened the leather folder she'd brought and slid it across to her attorney, a quiet motion, surgical in precision. Her lawyer rose, voice cool and assured. "Your Honor, the documents before you detail the prenuptial clauses signed prior to the marriage, drafted at Mrs. Castle's recommendation, with both parties' full consent and independent counsel present. These clauses preemptively protect Ms. Castle Rourke's inherited assets, as well as any trust funds held in her name." The judge nodded. "And those trusts remain active?" "They do, Your Honor. Additionally, Mrs. Castle ensured a contingency provision was placed in the marital agreement, triggered automatically in the event of infidelity or reputational misconduct that could impact joint holdings." Graham's head snapped up. "What?" The lawyer didn't blink. "Those provisions have been validated and executed. In short, Mr. Rourke no longer has financial claim to any shared assets, real estate, or investment income tied to the Castle family trust." Emily turned to her mother, eyes wide. You did this even when I defended him?" Irene met her gaze without apology. "I protected my daughter, even when she forgot she needed it." For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Emily looked down at her hands, trembling, not from anger, but relief. Graham leaned forward, his voice low but desperate. "This is theft, Irene, manipulation. You rigged everything before we were even married." She tilted her head slightly. "No, I planned for what happens when men mistake love for leverage." His attorney tried to recover. "Your Honor, we request further examination. These documents were prepared years ago. Circumstances have changed." The judge held up a hand. "I've seen enough." She flipped through the pages quickly, her tone firm. "The prenuptial agreement is airtight. The trusts are lawful, properly managed, and disclosed. There is no ambiguity here." Graham's lawyer tried one last appeal. "Your Honor, my client contributed to debt." The judge interjected dryly. "Not equity." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. Graham's face went red, his mouth tightening as the reality settled like lead. "The court hereby rules," the judge continued, "that all properties, trust funds, and accounts remain solely under Ms. Castle Rourke's control. Mr. Rourke is entitled to none of it. Additionally, he will assume full responsibility for any outstanding business debts under Rourke Capital Revival." The gavel fell once. The echo was merciless. Graham's head dropped. The weight of debt, financial, personal, and moral, seemed to bow his spine. Emily exhaled shakily, her shoulders sagging for the first time in years. Irene stood, calm as ever. She gathered her folder, her movements deliberate. As she passed Graham's table, she paused just long enough to speak quietly. "You could have had partnership," she said. "Instead, you wanted ownership. Now you have nothing." He didn't look up. Outside, the spring wind had turned sharp again, cutting across the courthouse steps. Emily stopped halfway down, turning to her mother. "All those years, you were 3 moves ahead of him." "Always be," Irene said, eyes on the city skyline. "That's how you survive the men who think they can play chess with queens." Behind them, through the glass doors, Graham stumbled out of the courtroom into the noise of waiting cameras. Reporters shouted his name, their questions cold and fast. Mr. Rourke, is it true you lost everything? Mr. Rourke, do you plan to appeal? He didn't answer. He just kept walking, past the cameras, past the crowd, into anonymity. At the curb, a black car pulled up beside Irene. The driver opened the door. Before getting in, she glanced once over her shoulder at the courthouse, the final theater of his downfall. "Debt suits him," she said quietly. The car door closed. Spring arrived late that year, as if even the weather were reluctant to let go of winter's grip. Chicago's skyline shimmered under pale sunlight, and from the 42nd floor of Castle Equity Group, the city looked reborn, alive, electric, and quietly watching its queen move the final pieces across the board. Irene Castle sat at the head of the conference table, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, pen in hand. The room around her was silent except for the soft shuffle of paper and the muted hum of the HVAC. A notary waited by the door. Noah stood to her left, Renee to her right. "This," Noah said, tapping the thick document before her, "finalizes the trust restructuring. Once you sign, Castle Equity Holdings becomes the controlling parent company for all subsidiaries under your name. Graham Rourke will no longer appear on a single document, contract, or financial ledger. His name is erased from the record, retroactive and permanent." "Good," Irene said simply. "History deserves editing." Renee smiled faintly. "And the successor trustee?" Without hesitation, Irene turned to the notary and gestured toward the dotted line. "Add her name." The notary glanced down at the paperwork, brows knitting. "Callie Rourke?" "No," Irene said. "Callie Castle." The correction was quiet but deliberate. Noah arched a brow. "You're appointing your granddaughter as successor trustee?" Irene's tone was steady. "This isn't about control. It's about continuity. One day she'll inherit more than money. She'll inherit the proof that power isn't something you marry. It's something you master." She signed with her usual grace. No flourish, no hesitation. The pen glided across the page, finishing the signature that sealed decades of calculation, sacrifice, and silent endurance. Renee exhaled. "It's done. The castle legacy stands on its own now." "Not stands," Irene corrected. "It endures." The conference room door opened and Emily stepped in, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She looked different, lighter, calmer. The anxiety that once lived behind her eyes had been replaced by quiet resolve. "Mom," she said, smiling slightly, "you could have told me you were rewriting the company." "I prefer to show, not tell," Irene said. Emily turned to Renee, extending a hand. "Congratulations, by the way. Permanent CEO. You've earned it." Renee clasped her hand, sincerity in her voice. "Your mother built the house. I'm just keeping the lights on." "You're keeping it alive," Irene said. They all shared a look, a rare moment of shared understanding among women who had learned, each in her own way, the price of being underestimated. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "One more thing," she said softly, sliding it across the table. Irene opened it. Inside were updated legal papers, her daughter's new identification cards, bank statements, a driver's license. One name was different: Emily Castle. Irene's breath caught just for a moment. "I wanted to do this in person," Emily said. "It's my name again, the one you gave me before anyone else tried to change it." Irene reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Welcome home, my dear." Renee cleared her throat, emotion flickering briefly in her eyes. "We also finalized the archival purge. Every internal record that had Graham's name, contracts, memos, even press photos, has been wiped and reissued. The company history now begins with Castle Holdings, officially." Noah slid his tablet toward Irene, showing her the updated website homepage. The new banner read, Castle Equity Group, founded by Irene Castle, 2005. Below it, in smaller letters, empowering vision, protecting value, building legacy. Irene studied the screen, her reflection merging with the black glass. It's remarkable, she said softly, how quickly the world forgets the men who think they're irreplaceable. Renee gave a quiet laugh. And how loudly they panic when they realize it. Noah looked up from his notes. What should we do about Graham's overseas filing? He's trying to spin his new company as a reclaimed venture legacy. Irene waved a hand dismissively. Legacies can't be reclaimed, they can only be earned, and he's spent his share of credit. She stood, closing the leather folder before her. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, gilding her silver hair and the edge of the table in gold. Noah and Renee rose as well. What should we tell the board about this restructuring? Noah asked. Tell them the truth, Irene said. The company has a new foundation, and it was built by women who were once told they were past their prime. Emily stepped forward, slipping her arm through her mother's. You know, Mom, she said softly, I used to hate that word. Old. It sounded like a limit, but now it sounds like a title. Irina's eyes glinted. Then let me claim mine properly. She turned to face them all, the partners, the protégés, the future. Her voice carried the poise of someone who had fought a war with silence and won. Old Maid, she said. No. Founder. The room was still for a moment, then broke into applause, soft at first, then building, resonant. Renee leaned close, smiling. You've just rewritten the rulebook. I didn't rewrite it, Irene said. I wrote the one they thought I'd never read. Outside, evening settled over the river. The new company name glowed across the top of the building, Castle Equity, letters gleaming against the dusk. In a dark cafe across the street, Graham watched it from behind the window, a cheap whiskey in his hand. The reflection of his face overlapped with the bright gold lettering. He looked smaller now, swallowed by the city he'd once tried to own. The bartender slid a folded newspaper toward him. The headline read, Castle Equity Restructures Legacy, Irene Castle, founder and chairwoman. He stared at it for a long moment, jaw tight. Then he crushed the paper in his fist and whispered, Enjoy your throne, while it lasts. Back in her office, Irene watched the city lights flicker on one by one. Her phone buzzed, a text from Noah. Noah, we've intercepted something. Graham's new venture isn't just overseas. He's buying into one of your subsidiaries. Irene's eyes narrowed. She turned from the window, the fire of calculation rekindling behind her calm. Let him come, she murmured. This time I'll make sure he doesn't just lose, he vanishes. It was a rainy Tuesday when Irene Castle's mentorship program officially launched at Castle Equity Group. The conference room on the 43rd floor was filled with young professionals, fresh-faced and eager, a mix of men and women from backgrounds Irene had once barely acknowledged. Yet here they were, waiting for a chance to prove themselves, to become the new wave of leadership. And they would, under her watch. Irene stood at the front of the room, her posture as composed as ever, every inch the mentor she had longed to become. The program was simple in theory but revolutionary in practice. Offer opportunities to those who had never been given a seat at the table, much less a chance to speak. Good morning, she said, her voice smooth, resonant. Welcome to your first day at Castle Equity Group. This isn't a place where titles matter. It's a place where character, intellect, and hard work do. You're here because you earned a seat, but now you have to prove you can hold it. This program is about showing you that the future is open to everyone, not just those with the loudest voices. The room was still for a moment. Then a murmur of approval spread, quiet yet sincere. Irene gave a small nod. Let's get started. As the program progressed, Claire arrived at the office for the first time since her appointment as successor trustee. She stepped off the elevator, her eyes scanning the space that had been Irene's empire for years. There was a quiet pride in her eyes, but also a recognition that the company wasn't just a monument to Irene's success. It was a living, breathing entity that would continue to grow. Claire's footsteps echoed as she walked through the hall to Irene's office, but her eyes paused on the leader's wall, the place where Irene's name had once stood alone, cold and unyielding. Now it was accompanied by new faces, women, young executives, some of them Black, some of them Asian, others Latino. It wasn't just Irene's legacy on the wall anymore, it was everyone's. Claire smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She stepped into Irene's office without knocking. Irene looked up from her desk, her expression softening just a fraction. "Claire," she said, "you look like you've seen a ghost." Claire laughed, her voice catching slightly. "I didn't expect it to feel this real. This company, it feels like it's mine now. It's not just about you anymore." Irene stood and gestured to the chair. "This company has always been for you. It's always been about leaving something lasting for those who would never be seen otherwise. I just had to make the first move." Claire sat across from Irene, the weight of her new role settling in. "You made a lot of moves. And now, I get to follow in your footsteps. I won't let you down." "You don't have to worry about that," Irene said, her tone firm but warm. "I know you're ready." At the following shareholder summit, Irene was invited to keynote. Renee, standing beside her, gave a small grin as they walked into the packed hall. There were no more nervous whispers about Irene's age, her experience, her past. Instead, there was admiration, respect, and the quiet hum of anticipation that preceded every powerful leader's entrance. The crowd's applause was immediate and thunderous when Irene took the stage. She scanned the room, the sea of faces, the excitement in their eyes, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her journey, the long, hard fight, had been worth it. "Good evening," Irene began. "When I first came into this industry, I was told that women like me don't make it. I was told I was too old, too quiet, too strategic. Well, here I am, standing before you, as the founder of Castle Equity, and I'm telling you, it's never about what you're called. It's about who you become once you stop listening to those voices." The applause grew louder, and Irene paused, letting the room absorb her words. "I stand here not as a figurehead, but as a leader who believes the future is built by those willing to look beyond themselves. Our work is just beginning." After the speech, Renee leaned toward Irene. "That speech, Irene, it's unforgettable." Irene smiled, her face softened by years of experience. Unforgettable is good. But power, that's something you don't have to say aloud. It speaks for itself. Irene's phone buzzed as she exited the stage, another meeting request, another opportunity to step into the unknown. But for a brief moment as she walked through the crowd, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned, and there was Callie, holding a small toy-sized headset. Callie grinned up at her grandmother, her small hand outstretched. "I'm your assistant today," she said with mock seriousness, her voice too cute to be taken seriously. Irene's heart warmed as she crouched to meet her granddaughter's eyes. "Well, if you're my assistant," Irene said, a twinkle in her eyes, "I need you to help me plan for the future." Callie slipped the headset over her head and nodded. "I'll make sure you're never alone." Irene's lips curved into a smile, and for once it was not a smile of strategy or foresight. It was a smile of gratitude. Gratitude for the legacy she had built, for the future she had secured, and for the family standing beside her. As they walked toward the elevator, Noah approached from behind, his voice low. "You're not just in control anymore, Irene," he said. "You're unforgettable." Irene turned toward him with a faint smile. I've always been. But as the elevator doors closed and the lights dimmed in the conference hall, she felt the pulse of the city outside the windows. The future was hers to shape, just as it always had been. And no one, not even Graham Rourke, could take that from her. The morning light hit Irene Castle's desk like an omen, sharp and unforgiving. She sat with her back straight, her eyes scanning the latest financial reports with surgical precision. But today, her gaze kept drifting to the small gold pin resting in the palm of her hand. It was simple, elegant, a miniature version of the company's new logo, designed by Callie. The delicate swirl of gold mirrored the Castle Equity emblem, but with a slight twist, a mark of reinvention, of legacy built anew. Irene slipped the pin into her blazer pocket and stood up, adjusting her collar with an air of quiet authority. Her reflection in the glass was as sharp as ever, though now it carried the weight of generations, those she'd built and those who had tried to destroy her. The knock at her door was faint, but she recognized the rhythm. It was Emily. "Mom," she said, stepping in, her face more relaxed than Irene had seen in months. "I've been thinking." Her voice trailed off, but Irene knew what was coming. Emily stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "You didn't just protect me, you woke me up." Irene tilted her head slightly, studying her daughter. "It's about time." Emily sat on the edge of the chair by Irene's desk, her fingers playing with the hem of her sleeve. "I never understood what you were doing. I thought you were playing a game that was already over. But now I see it. You weren't just fighting for me, you were fighting for me to see." Irene smiled faintly. Every daughter deserves a mother who fights in silence. There was a soft knock at the door again, and Renee entered with a folder in her hand, her usual composed self. "The board is ready, Irene. Everything is in place for the final vote on the restructuring. The new bylaws are set to be adopted today." "Good," Irene said, her gaze lingering on her daughter. "Then we have work to do." They all walked into the boardroom, the weight of history pressing down on every step. The board members were already seated, waiting with an expectancy that had shifted from nervousness to respect. They had watched Irene build this empire from the ground up, and now they were ready to embrace the new future she had promised. The meeting was short, decisive, a far cry from the tense confrontations of the past. Irene sat at the head of the table, her eyes calm but steely, directing the conversation with an effortless authority. The vote passed unanimously, and Castle Equity officially became an impenetrable fortress, the foundation now unshakable. Afterward, as the board members dispersed, Irene stood and made her way to the back of the room where the staff had gathered. The chair at the head of the table was replaced, the engraved plaque now reading, "Founder, Matriarch, Strategist." She ran her fingers lightly over the engraving, feeling the weight of every letter, every title, as though they had been etched into her very soul. She had earned it. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" Renee asked, standing beside her. Irene looked up at her. "I already know what happens next. We keep building." As they walked toward the elevator, Emily stood at the threshold, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You know," she said softly, "I used to be afraid of being like you." Irene raised an eyebrow, her voice low but firm. "And now?" "Now," Emily said, her eyes steady. "I think I'm ready to be." Irene's heart softened for a moment, but the moment passed quickly, replaced by the sharp clarity that had always driven her. They entered the elevator together, the doors closing behind them. The weight of the years, of Graham's arrogance, of the fight she had endured to protect everything she had built, was no longer something Irene had to carry alone. She had her family, her legacy, and now, a future that would never again be in doubt. The elevator descended to the ground floor. Irene stepped out first, her coat billowing behind her like the cloak of a conqueror. The wind cut through her as she walked past the building's glass exterior, the company's name, Castle Equity, shining like gold in the morning sun. Graham Rourke's name had already faded from the building's history, his face erased from the lobby, and the public would soon forget his failed venture as well. He had tried to claim what wasn't his, and now he would never be able to touch it again. A black sedan waited at the curb. Irene slipped inside without a glance behind her. She had already won the game. Her phone buzzed in her bag, pulling her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw the text from Noah. Noah. Graham's been seen meeting with another venture group. This time, his ally is someone you'll recognize. Irene smiled faintly and set the phone back in her bag. She didn't need to worry about this new enemy. She had built her empire on the foundation of her own strength, and nothing, no man, no venture, could unseat her now. My daughter's husband mocked me as an old maid, so I bought his company and kicked him out.